What's good, beautiful people? I hope you're having a fantastic day today. Today, I want to talk about something that's quite different, and that is centered around how to run an economy, how to run a 21st century economy. I'm not a politician, I'm not an economist. I'm just kind of doing this as a thought experiment, pretty much, if I'm honest with you. So, essentially, what I've done is I've picked some areas that I think are of interest, and I've obviously got generative AI to support me with this. I've always got my notes as per usual. And essentially, the areas that we're going to be looking at is digital and technological transformation, adaptive economic policies, green and sustainable growth, workforce and future skills, entrepreneurship and innovation, trade and global economic resilience. And then there's going to be sort of like a spill off of different things as well. Now, I could have chosen some other areas. I could have spoken about income inequality or cultural influence or soft power or the housing crisis, etc., etc. But do you know what? I just kind of like went with what the AI said, if I'm honest with you. And I did question it to see why it chose those different things. And it gave me various different reasons. So maybe I could do a video on those other sort of like areas or factors. But for now, let's just go with this. And of course, if you got ideas, then you can leave them below. Now, of course, all of these different areas are in some way, shape, or form linked to some sort of government department. So I believe there are, I want to say 40 odd different government departments within the UK, but I'd need to check that. So, but there are many, and some of these align to different ones. So, for example, when it comes to, let's say, for example, healthcare, that would be the Department of Health and Social Care, okay, as an example. So if you ever want to understand or know what is happening in a given sort of like topic or factor that contributes to the economy, then it's best, or not even the economy, the country at large, then it's best to check out what the department is saying and understanding what the data says in relation to that. So you've got the Office for National Statistics that reports on all of this different types of data. But of course, you can actually go to the department website to find out more about some of its policies, some of its programs, some of its initiatives, etc., etc. So these are things to bear in mind. Now, why do I say 21st century economy? Well, that would suggest that there are some economies that are lagging behind and haven't quite caught up to what a 21st century economy looks like. But really and truly, how do you really measure that? Well, you measure that based on the innovation that exists within the 21st century versus what existed before and what that transition looks like. There's always going to be some sort of gap. So, for example, in some economies or organizations or industries, you'd get situations where people are still using or pushing paper, so to speak, as opposed to having digital records, etc., etc., etc. So, it just gives you a bit of an idea in terms of all of that stuff. Now, when thinking about, let's say, for example, digital and technological transformation, the things that it came up with was AI, automation, and big data driven growth. 5G connectivity and digital public services increase efficiency. So I know people know about 5G and they've probably got the whole theories about 5G during a pandemic and all that kind of stuff there. So there's all of that jazz. And then there's cybersecurity, okay, which helps with ensuring that there's the right level of digital expansion. So if we look at that first section, digital and technological transformation. So what has been promised to us? Essentially, I believe his name is Peter Kyle. He is the Secretary of State for Science, Technology, and IT, I want to say. And he's pushing this AI agenda, and so he should. He's ensuring, again, that the UK is at least front runner. And I don't laugh because I don't think it's possible, but there is a lot that needs to be done for the UK to be front runner when it comes to, ensuring that we have the capability, the infrastructure, and the man and woman power to be an AI hub. Okay, and so there's this whole idea that if we're going to do this, then we need to create our own sort of like Silicon Valley within the UK, which is a bridge between Oxford, Milton Keynes, and Cambridge. And so, with all of that in mind, there are plans to sort of like push this stuff, especially when it comes to how we manage our tax system and finances. So, there are some changes that they're thinking of doing, in addition to ensuring that our public sector is digitized. And Peter Carr has gone out and said, I think he said this last week or so, that, give me 18 months and I can radically transform the digital transformation within the UK. If he can do it, if he says he can do it, then let's see if he can do it, you know. But this is one thing that he's saying that the UK needs. And of course, all these ambitions are great. But what is currently the situation? Well, if we think about how we fare against China, and we fare against America, and we fare against some of these other countries that are really pushing the technical transformation and digital transformation agenda, we've got a long way to go. And for whatever reason, we lack AI talent. Okay, there is a shortage of individuals who can actually deliver the goods when it comes to AI. Now, I only say this because not because I don't think we have the capability or potential to be there, and not because we don't have people at all. We definitely have some talented individuals. But when it comes to the global stage, the innovations are not coming from the UK. And the argument could be that's because of the way the procedures have been set up, such as business incentive procedures and the policies and the regulations that don't support small business owners and or large business owners to push these agendas. There is also something to be said about what has been the I guess the horizon scanning in terms of understanding what we need to be focusing on as a country when it comes to our education and translating that education into productivity within the workforce. It's hard to really pinpoint it, you know. There was a time, obviously, a lot of millennial children had laptops and computers in their primary schools. Okay, there was just a shift compared to the oldest who didn't have that, and then the youngest who did have that all of a sudden. And so that was kind of like a trigger, so to speak. But then what happened after that? Where was the real intentional shift into this new space? Hard to say. You've seen this in some African countries. You've seen this definitely in some Asian countries. You've definitely seen, well, some of this in the States at least anyway. And of course, it comes down to how many people there is and the sort of policies and regulations that exist within that country. But there is a lack of talent, so to speak. Okay. And of course, the other thing to say is because of that lack of talent, typically what happens is that the really talented individuals that we do have work for countries overseas, whether they physically go there or they remotely work for these organizations or companies, whether these are American companies or other European countries or whatever it may be, because, you know, they're in high demand. And so it's not about them looking about things within the UK, it's about them looking for opportunities wherever those opportunities exist, which is more than understandable. So this is not every single high flyer within this space within the UK, but this is an example of stuff that's happening. And so the other thing I would like to say to this, and of course, you know, I've worked in some public sector organizations, but I'm not gonna sort of like, this is me not trying to bash, it's just more a reality that we have at the moment. There is a lack of some technological advancement when it comes to just everyday administerial things, you know, or administrative things, should I say administerial? What am I saying? Administrative things, okay? Whether this comes down to how we track things, how we record things, how we integrate things, making things more efficient or more effective, just using technology. There are loads of amazing projects, programs, initiatives that have been set up to try and tackle these things. But unfortunately, there are many situations where a lot of projects are set up and, you know, a couple years, couple months down the line, you know, there's no funding to complete or continue that project. Okay. And typically what ends up happening is because of a lack of resource, because of a lack of planning, because of a lack of internal understanding within those public sector departments in terms of what is actually required to make something work, there are lots of forgotten projects that had a lot of promise that don't necessarily work out, which is such a shame. So again, I've written here, the UK says it wants to be an AI superpower, but if you don't have the right workforce and digital infrastructure, how does that actually work? So in order for them to become more of a modern society in that way, aligns to, you know, tech and all that kind of stuff, there has to be great investment in terms of fixing the education and tech industry retention area sort of thing. So good education in schools, great education within the workforce, but also finding ways to actually retain, you know, these individuals. It has to be attractive by nature. So the attractiveness is key. So that's the first bit. The second bit is centered around economic growth and fiscal policies. Okay, so dealing with this stagnation and productivity crisis that we have at the moment. And I said it in a couple of videos before that actually the economy has shrunk. Okay, it's gone smaller. Now, is this something to be like, oh my gosh? Not yet, not yet. And I say yet tentatively, not because I'm suggesting that we could end up in a recession or anything like that, but I'm saying this to say that anything could happen. You know, anything could happen. But where we're at the moment, it feels very neutral. It doesn't feel very hopeful. The mood is very weird within the UK at the moment. You know, and so, you know, Rachel Reeves spoke about, you know, how she wants to grow the economy and how there needs to be changes to, again, how government makes decisions. And this is why, you know, been this big push in terms of getting rid of certain public sector organizations and quangos and all this kind of stuff there. And also pledges to reduce government debt as well while spending it on public services, which is a bit techie because there are 20 plus odd different government organizations and or advisory bodies or whatever you want to call them that the Labour government at least want to impart, or not impart, install, should we say, whilst getting rid of some others, whilst also boosting the defence budget as well. And so, what does it balance out to? I'm not quite sure. You know, taxes have increased, okay, or will increase from the 5th of April when it comes to I say taxes, but what I'm really talking about is national insurance contributions for employers. Sorry, that's what I was meant to say. So that's increased, which means that that creates more pressure when it comes to organizations recruiting for new individuals because maybe they don't want to spend that money. Maybe they don't want to spend that money. There is now a demand for minimum wage at 12 pounds and 21 pence, which means again it creates this squeeze and this expectation that maybe organizations can't upkeep. So really all of this stuff contributes to part of the stagnation, you know. The economy has barely been growing within the UK and it's been really poor, really poor. Investment is also pretty weak within the UK at the moment, and it makes it very difficult for the UK to create something attractive when it comes to investments. Now, of course, many people have heard that there have been some big multilateral organizations who have started to throw in some sort of investments into the UK, and I don't want to name drop here, which raises a lot of questions in terms of, okay, is the UK being bought out because it's suffering at the moment? And with that in mind, does that mean that certain policies or things are being enforced because of this buyout? Or does it mean something else? Of course, you know, we're currently experiencing a lot of high taxes, and some would say a weak public services, sort of like, I guess, benefit system. And when I say benefit system, I'm not talking about the benefit system, I'm talking about the benefits that we get from the public sector. It's not cutting it. It's not cutting it, especially for the taxes that we pay. So there's all of this stuff to bear in mind. So what can we actually do to fix productivity and all this kind of stuff there? Well, really and truly, I think at least anyway, it really comes down to, let's think about the normal person. The normal person wants to keep as much money as possible. And if they can keep as much money as possible, then they may be more willing to spend that money on what may be deemed as risks that may turn into opportunities. Really, I'm talking about being a bit more entrepreneurial by nature, investing in things a bit more, feeling a bit more optimistic about life. But if it feels like every single thing's being dragged away from you, it's frustrating. Even driving down the street, I know it's for sort of like health and safety reasons, X, Y, and Z, but 20 miles per hour, you feel like you're in this cell. You feel like you're controlled. You know, that's what it feels like. I'm not saying this is the case, but it feels that way. And so if left, right, and center feels like you're in this box, you know, I don't know if you've heard of the box life. You wake up in a box, you go to work in a box, you work in the box, you come home in a box, and you sleep in a box, and you die in a box. I'm talking about obviously a bed, a house, a car, your workplace, the bus home, your bed, and then a coffin. It's mad. The box life. Just remember that. It's nuts. So with all of this stuff in mind, it means that there is not much incentive for people to want to come to this country to start business in that way. Of course, there are still people coming into the country because they still believe that there are better opportunities here relative to elsewhere in the world, and they may get a rude awakening. They may actually sort of like live into their thoughts of this country. Whatever it is, there is definitely a sort of like challenging understanding of why the UK is the way it is right now. And there's a question as to whether this is being driven because it's truly what the government believes is the best for the country in terms of making sure that the economy grows, okay, and well-being is better and all this kind of stuff there, or is there an undertone of a political agenda involved within this space? Now, obviously, this is the second part, but as I speak about all this stuff, the stuff that is highlighted as doom and gloom could be suggested as opportunities for people who want to look into this space. So, for example, when it comes to, stagnation and, high taxes and all this kind of stuff there, this is where the finance people come out, the finance gurus come out and start talking about ways in which you can better manage your money, find tax efficiencies, etc., etc. Same thing when it comes to the digital and tech space. Are there certain areas or do you have certain expertise that you can utilize in order for you to position departments, organizations, businesses better for success when it comes to agentic tools and AI and all that kind of jazz there? So bear all of this stuff in mind. So really and truly, without the right infrastructure and tax incentives and all of that kind of stuff there, people are less likely going to want to invest. The next thing is centered around green energy, okay? And it's been spoken that the UK aims for net zero by 2050 and wants to be a leader in renewable energy. And there is a commitment to phasing out fossil fuels and electricity grid by 2030. Interesting stuff. Now, Keir Starmer spoke about Great British Energy as part of his manifesto when he was running for candidacy as the Prime Minister. And I mean, I haven't seen much more about it, so let's see what happens there. But of course, there is an opportunity to create more jobs for what seems like a public sector organization, unless there's close links with the private sector, which again, I guess is good in that way. But again, does this green agenda link to increased regulation, increased policies, more taxation, all of that kind of stuff there? Or is it for the benefit of making sure that we have a more sustainable, more healthier, more enriching environment that can prosper and can be sustained for the long term? Like, what side of the coin is it? Because it's hard to say. I'm not a green boffin. I don't really know much about renewables and stuff. Maybe I should. But it has been classed as a way to create a modern society. And this is why I question, what does modern specifically mean? But again, it makes perfect sense in this way. So there's been a number of different things. So again, you may know that there's been opportunities to start thinking about offshore wind farms and utilizing nuclear energy to essentially power some of the UK and all this kind of stuff there. I think I'm less positioned to talk to this space, but I guess what you could do is, if this is something you're interested in, there's more research that can be done in terms of opportunities that you can capitalize on in terms of understanding how you can pivot into a space like this if it makes sense, not just based on interest, but in terms of opportunities as well. So Rachel Reeves' sort of like spring budget is going to be quite interesting when it comes to learning more about what is on the cards, what's going to be enforced from the 5th of April onwards, etc., etc. So let's keep it moving. Workforce and jobs. So what's being promised? Well, we're trying to attract, okay, highly skilled individuals abroad, okay, and highly skilled being a key word. And the reason I say highly skilled is because it probably aligns to some of the incentives and goals that we're trying to achieve when it comes to the digital transformation and AI, the greens and the renewables, and some of the other stuff that is high on the agenda for the UK. But also, let's be real. Let's be very real. There is a focus, or should be a focus at least anyway, on upskilling British workers, okay, for modern industries. For modern industries. Keep on talking about this. I think it's the was it the World Economic Forum report? I believe it was, that talks to this stuff. And unfortunately, we're just not there yet. So there has to be an upskilling agenda. There just has to be. Um, Currently, at the moment, what we're facing is that, as a country, we just feel very let down because it doesn't feel like there are many jobs out there. I know recruitment agencies are struggling heavily, because of the fact that they're seeing the same, but also they're not necessarily getting the call from the hiring manager saying that they're looking for X. Of course, it still exists, but of course, it's reduced a little bit. And we've seen this when the pandemic happened, after the pandemic, which is now, of course. So there is a struggle when it comes to the labor markets, and of course, this definitely links to why there is low productivity. Of course, over the last couple of years, there have definitely been organizations and small and medium enterprises and all that kind of jazz, that have decided actually they're not going to continue doing business anymore because they can't afford it. It just doesn't make sense because the squeeze is real. The squeeze is real. The rate at which people are making more money, or at least getting a pay rise or getting an increase to their pay, or whatever it may be, relative to how quickly things are getting expensive, it is not equal. It's not equal. That's why it's becoming difficult to 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 basically recruit people. It's becoming extremely difficult. And so how are we going to do this? Like, the workforce is the backbone of the economy. But if people aren't earning well, how can they contribute to growth? It comes back to morale again. So it's difficult to know what to do here, but I think there has to be a long-term serious plan about the like making sure the labor market is skilled up properly. And I'm not talking about some cheap budget looking sort of like course that's done for like a couple of hours and then that's that. Like, there needs to be a serious approach towards education. Okay, there needs to be a serious approach, because otherwise, if you don't have the knowledge and then the practice to support that knowledge, then you're going to be in situations where actually you don't feel confident in implementing what you've learned. You don't feel confident at all. So we have to get to that point where that becomes a thing. Does this need to be government led? No. I mean, you guys watching this video could be part of the reason or the answer towards upskilling these different types of people. And this is what I'm saying. Like, there's opportunities in these failures or these negatives or these challenges, that I'm talking to. There are opportunities. It just comes down to how do you find these opportunities. And so this is where I talk about unstructured and structured opportunities. The unstructured ones are, you speak to people, go to networking events, talk to this person, blah, 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 cold calling, the stuff you see on YouTube all the time. The more structured approach is where you essentially apply for different tenders and bids. Okay, you go onto procurement portals and you see what is out there in terms of opportunity and you apply. Okay, this stuff is quite, it takes a while to apply for some of this stuff, but I think they will make the process a bit easier. They have said they're going to do that, which would increase competition, but it will mean there's definitely more opportunities outside of just getting a new job or outside of just trying to do things via the unstructured route, etc., etc. So bear all that stuff in mind. There's also entrepreneurship and startups, okay? And it feels like the UK is falling behind, because when we think of entrepreneurship within the UK, what does that look like? I mean, unless you've done something like, I don't know, you've invested in a business or a set of businesses, okay? Whether you've worked there and or you've done this via stocks and stuff, or unless you've done property, okay, or unless you've worked up the ladder within some sort of fintech company or finance. It's very samey in that way. It doesn't feel like there are sort of like many other things you can do. Of course, there are examples of many amazing organizations and startups that are doing stuff. There are many angel investors who have businesses that invest in these different types of businesses. I'm an advisor for a VC startup called Zinc, and there are some amazing businesses within that sort of like space. Different types of businesses, but it feels like you have to be extremely smart and extremely sort of like special to set up some sort of entrepreneurship endeavor, and that isn't necessarily the case. I don't think that is true, but there are market trends that lean towards certain type of sectors like AI, fintech, life sciences, all that kind of stuff there. So what's being promised by the UK? So the UK government is promoting fintech, AI, and life sciences as key sectors for future economic growth. Surprise, surprise. And they're trying to provide more funding for entrepreneurs and small businesses. Yeah, I don't know. You tell me what your thoughts are in relation to that. Like I said in my last video, there's been a decline in startups. So there is this sentiment that people are less likely going to start a startup, but that data is indicative of people not wanting to register their business as a limited company, as an example, etc., etc. There isn't strong venture capital within the UK, and there are some amazing individuals who are trying to like go against the norm when it comes to this stuff. So, check out the LinkedIn's or the different events and all this kind of stuff there to learn how you can, get these opportunities to potentially get your organization or company backed. And it's very difficult to access funding. I think one thing that's clear about the UK is that it's very difficult to access this stuff when it comes to, big opportunities, grants, money, funding, all of this kind of stuff there. It's not clear. And so it just makes it difficult. It just makes it very difficult, you know. So what do we do? What do we do? Well, I guess you need to incentivize startups and businesses to make it feel like they can start a business. Okay, so a better tax system makes sense. You need to make them feel like actually they're not bad for actually setting up a business. There are many individuals who, have come from the school of hard knocks. They've worked their way up, whether that's within a career and or entrepreneurship, and then they're badged as the bad person for trying stuff against a very difficult system. So they shouldn't be felt to be made that way, you know. But inequality is a real thing. Let's not lie. Income inequality is a real thing. Is there something that these people didn't know, or is this related to hard work and intelligence and all this kind of stuff there? I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think it's a mix of very deep and complex factors and drivers, etc., etc. Sometimes people are just lucky, finding the right opportunity, but we shouldn't use that purely as an excuse always. Then we have the sixth section, which is centered around trade and our relationship with the EU. And of course, the B word comes up, Brexit. Okay, we left the EU in 2016/2017, I want to say. And so, what is the UK trying to do now? It's trying to forge new deals outside of the EU, and it's trying to repair its relations with Europe as well. And of course, we've kind of seen that over um, the situation with Russia and Ukraine. It's kind of like, oh, I know we're not talking, but let's talk about how we can ensure that Ukraine is like supported and stuff. And it's great they're banding together, but there's this thing called Brexit that divides them. So it's interesting to see what sort of things may be set up with the EU in terms of how they work together. Now, of course, we don't lose all of their, I'm going to say, the blueprint towards the rules, regulations, and policies that that we used from the EU before, but it does mean that we do lose the resource and the support and all of that kind of jazz there. So there's challenges that need to be sort of like thought about. Now, it's shown that studies have shown that the UK trade is 50% lower than it would have been if it was inside the EU, which is pretty big. But again, like I said, the UK is trying to broker deals with Australia, New Zealand. I don't know if they're doing deals with Africa, to be fair. That would be interesting. Can you imagine? They probably are, but we don't really know about it. I know there are some deals trying to be brokered within Asia as well. I want to say India, but again, I don't want to quote something that's incorrect. But again, if you're a specialist within this area, or you understand things around trade and all of that kind of jazz, there are there opportunities for you to help broker those sort of like relationships and or situations. So what am I saying is going well? We got a strong fintech sector, or at least we are gathering speed and storm within that space. We've got good AI research potential, and potential is the key word. There is potential, but we probably have to find ways to generate and fund the electricity and garner the space to enable AI to be a thing within the UK. And there is some investment in sustainability as well. Okay, whether that investment has come from um, really wealthy organizations that are supporting us, or whether it's because of the incentives that we're driving, there is some investment in that stuff. What's not working? Well, we currently have low productivity and slow growth. Taxes are high, and public services are not quite meeting that high bracket of tax, and it's even convoluted. Is it the right approach and system that we're utilizing when it comes to taxes? That is the question. There are a whole bunch of Brexit related issues, and you could argue that actually the fact that we're in this situation is because of Brexit and all of that debacle that happened, but that may be too easy as a cop out. And the reality is, the UK that it was before, the United Kingdom, a whole United Kingdom, is different. It's just losing its edge. And if we look at its interesting past, its dark past, should we say, yeah, it was always going to lose its edge, because at the end of the day, empires rise and fall. That's just what happens. And so, with that in mind, you have to think to yourself, how does this really affect me? Now, what is actually possible? Well, we do know there is an intention to want to increase the technological capabilities within the UK when it comes to the public sector services and the AI potential, etc., etc. We do know it's possible that there could be improvements when it comes to filling the skill gap for Brits. I think that is so important. But I feel like, just filling the skill gap is not enough in terms of education. It's a cultural change. There needs to be a deep cultural change. I might do a video on this centered around um, like the confidence levels within the UK. Like what is that? Where does that come from? What is British culture really and truly? Because I know I talk about careers and stuff, okay, but all of this stuff affects careers. So I talk about it just for my own development and learning, and for like just to interact with you guys as well. I know I've been really bad in the comments, so apologies. So yeah, so thinking about how do we change the culture and also generate the education to fill the skill gap, sorry, and boost productivity within UK, but also give businesses the confidence that they can actually do business here. And obviously, there's an opportunity to do better trade deals for those outside of EU. What needs to change? Well, there definitely needs to be deep, serious economic reforms, and those economic reforms are related to taxes, really and truly. We need to not feel like we're just working to serve this country. Like, stop that. Stop it. It's not fair. There are some people who got plans, which is all of us. And if you're just basically saying, actually, forget your plans, focus on my plans only, and you will do as you're told, sort of thing, it just doesn't feel right, if that makes sense. I know I'm sort of like underplaying it with this really colloquial sort of like relaxed language, but that's how it feels. In terms of like a greener economy, again, we're not quite there yet. Okay, and of course, the benefits of that is just when it comes to sort of like health benefits for our children, and just us as adults, and just having us having sound minded, etc., etc. I don't think that's just an environmental thing. I think that's also a health thing in general. We could do better than sort of like lean into the 67+% of adults being clinically obese, well, obese or whatever it may be. And this is not to do the whole fat shaming thing or anything else. I'm purely talking about longevity of life, so to speak, you know. And of course, longevity of life, as crude as it sounds, contributes to challenges for the UK and its infrastructure, whether it's healthcare system, its transport system, its housing system, etc., etc. So maybe they're doing this on purpose. Yeah, let me not go down that road. No, I wouldn't suggest that at all. I think it's more a case of we have to find a way to support longevity and healthy life, but also think about what that looks like in terms of an infrastructure within society, supporting that the right way. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. That's pretty much all the stuff that I really wanted to talk about. So, this whole thing started off, what does a modern society look like? Did I quite talk to that? Yeah, in some ways I did. In some ways I did. In some ways I didn't. But really, it was to talk about different areas that the UK is sort of like feeling through at the moment. And if I'm kind of like trying to work out what is happening, it's hard to say whether it's going to go left or right, up or down, good or bad. I don't think it's conclusive. And because it's not conclusive, the optimist in me wants to have some level of hope that actually there is change amidst us that could be positive, but it may be a bumpy road. But I do believe in the fact that we could sort of hang around and just think about the fact that change is needed, or we can just capitalize on what we can see and just ride the wave until the wave is worn out. So anyway, that's that. Let me know your thoughts below, and I'd love to understand what other things that are of concern to you when it comes to the UK and making sure that it's a modern economy that is suited for Britons, okay? Or Britons, by the way. For any one of you who are trying to like, you know what. Anywho, if you want to see more videos centered around, I don't know, I'm calling this soft economics, portfolio careers, and all that kind of jazz there, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And as always, my friends, understand, reach, and expand. Peace.